Welcome back.
To the Tiny Bookcase. I'm Ben.
And I am Nico. What you're about to hear is an interview.
A damn good one, too. Prepare to learn.
If you enjoy hearing this guest talk, be sure to check out last week's episode where you can hear their story.
Ours, too, if you're so inclined.
So, without further ado,
on with the show. Oh, wonderful. Right, well, enough of the silliness. Let's ask some questions. We've got some new questions for season 3. So we're going to open with, for you, Simon, what is the first book you remember reading?
Okay, I did think it was going to be what the fuck is wrong with you, but yeah, this one will work as well. After the Ash Bukake thing, it's usually the kind of thing that kind of question that springs to most people's mind. Yeah, well,
I wouldn't worry about it. We're all mad here.
Oh, good. Okay, well, the first book I remember reading. Now, I grew up when I was growing up. A lot of the time, I was reading short stories. But the first complete novel, I think that I can remember reading, is a Doctor Who book. Which I picked up in a library book sale, Doctor Who and the Claws of Axos, I think it was, which was by Ted and Sticks. And of course, I loved Doctor Who, even though the only Doctor Who I knew was Tom Baker, and this was a John Pertwee one. And Ted and Sticks wrote, I think, the lion's share of most of the classic Doctor Who novelisations. So I read a lot of his stuff, and he was very good had a very straightforward sort of and quite witty storytelling style that caught the spirit of the show. So that was it was sort of my bridge into sort of from stuff that was strictly for kids at novel length into grown-up writing. Although I'm trying to remember how old I was when I read that, and how old I was when I started reading books by people like Jack Higgins and Alistair MacLean and Douglas Reman, because my grandfather had a load of those books. Whenever we went out to see him, my grandma, I was always like, picking the Eagle Has Landed or Winged Escort or whatever off the shelf and having a browse. So I don't think I understood half of what was going on a lot of the time.
So this is the Claws of Claws of Axos, was it?
Yeah.
Claws of Axios.
Axos, yeah. AXOS.
This is Axos, yeah. This is the first one that you really engaged with, though. Like it's hooked you.
I think it was the first novel that I actually remember reading. As I say, I was mainly reading growing up. I was mainly more reading short stories than novels a lot of the time. So I was picking up. There was the local library was fantastic for that sort of things. Had a lot of anthologies by people like Helen Hoke, a lot of Fontana books of horror, and my granddad again had this huge book called A Century of Thrillers. It's a massive thick book printed in about 1929, and it was full of stuff by Ambrose Bierce, Edgar Allan Poe, Algernon Blackwood, all these guys. No Lovecraft or M.R. James, funny enough, so I didn't encounter those, even though they were like two of the big dudes in horror. I didn't encounter them until many years later. But I was I think I was about 7 or 8 when I read The Mask of the Red Death for the first time. And you get to that final line about how darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. I'm like, because that's kind of like a pretty goddamned apocalyptic. And, this is possibly one reason I turned out the way I did. So there's a lot of short fiction. There's a lot of books of short fiction that I read over the years. But yeah, that's probably the first novel. And obviously, I didn't just stick to reading Doctor Who.
No, of course. But that's where it sort of began with novels. I wonder how common it is for kids to read short fiction first, because I must have read some short stories when I was a child, but I think I mostly read like sort of young adult fiction. I think that there was a big boom in that market around the time that I was quite young.
Let's see,
it felt like there was.
How old are you? When would you have been sort of?
So I'm nearing 30, so I'm 29 at the moment.
Oh boy, I'm 47. So there's this huge difference in
just a little gap, yeah. Quite possibly, although I could be wrong. That could be entirely subjective. That all of a sudden I saw them because I was reading them. I wonder whether anyone else could confirm that. But I know that a lot of fantasy writers in particular started writing young adult fiction to go alongside their adult fiction simply because the market was there and there was money.
Oh yeah, that's always a good. That's
in
often a
the sort
reason
of-
to do things. It's a big motivator.
Yeah,
Another
well,
big,
yeah.
again, a big motivator. I think a lot of time with short stories, it was that kind of. I mean, I'd be getting novels out of the library, but I couldn't always. I didn't always have the staying power to beaver all the way through. I think a lot of what the kind of the stuff that was for younger readers seemed a little bit tame for me. I did want stuff which had blood and gore and people shooting the shit out of each other and
Oh, definitely.
all that
Yeah.
kind of thing, which a lot of the YA stuff tended to pull back a bit on.
And then occasionally one would sort of tease something and think about it for a while. And it was.
Tell you something from young Nico's memory. The Star Trek novels are surprisingly horny. I can.
I think
when you're like 7 and 8.
I do think I remember picking one of it was a bunch of Star Trek stories up. I think I have vague memories of some of them, but I was always more of a Doctor Who, or occasionally Blake Seven. I mean, this is another thing. If you're growing up watching stuff like Tom Baker era Doctor Who and Blake Seven, which could be goddamn grim and have very high body counts, it was kind of hard to kind of settle into sort of stuff that seemed at all gentler. And like I said, I was nicking a lot of my grandpa's Jack Higgins books and stuff like that. So it was kind of like, I don't know how many balustrades Jack Higgins thinks there are in England, but the number of times somebody gets shot through the heart, usually with a Walther PPK, killing them instantly and driving them back over the balustrade. How many fucking balustrades are there in the entire country for this to be happening? There's so many.
I've got 3.
Oh well, there you go. Maybe Derek from Health and Safety needed to have a word there.
I think you've got to keep the English carpenters in business, haven't you? So you've got to shatter your fair share of balustrades. So, well, that's absolutely fascinating. This idea that you've been very much a short story driven reader from a very early age, then, which makes a lot of sense with how and horror as well. Fascinating, yeah.
So we know you can write.
I hope so.
We know that's in there. You've got that in the chamber. I want to know, what's your secret talent that no one knows about?
Okay, now I did ask my wife about this, and her suggestion was farting. But I don't think it's so secret because it's very audible. But I'm a passable singer. I can do quite a good Northern Irish accent, and I did used to act a bit. So I don't know how those are for hidden talents, but. What was it? What?
I feel like forcing you to do the rest of the podcast in a Northern Irish accent now.
I could try, but you'd probably get a lot of Northern Ireland listeners writing in to say, "What the fuck? That guy did not sound like he was from Northern Ireland." So maybe not.
If you're listening in and you're from Northern Ireland, please feel free to rate Simon's Northern Irish accent.
Absolutely, hit us on Twitter and let us know.
On
a scale of England to Northern Ireland, where does the accent sit?
When I was at college, I was in a production of a play called The Factory Girls, which is set in a factory in Ireland. The director was from Ireland as well. So, most of us tried to do Irish accents, and a couple of us didn't. So the factory manager everyone else sounded from various parts of Southern Ireland. I sounded like Ian Paisley because my accent went very Northern Ireland. And then we had the office junior in the factory who was basically sounded like she came from Stockport, and the manager who was from Doncaster, because they just gave up on the whole accent part of the the whole part of the thing. So
I don't know. It worked for Connery in The Hunt for Red October. I think sometimes you're just better off leaving the accent behind, aren't you?
Oh yes, I'm not really Spanish. I was born
a Russian mine.
I think Highlander takes the biscuit
do not
for
even
that.
get me started on the casting in Highlander.
I mean, and Christopher Lambert, you look like a woman, you stupid aggies. Haggish, what is haggish? Were you guys on crack when you cast that film?
Watch Haggish line.
I took,
you cannot get away with that in his voice.
I mean, you kind of think, was that in the script already, or did they add that to the script when Sean Connery was cast? Just think, I fucking dare you put that in.
They just thought he was bulletproof from all of his time in Bond. They were just like, we're going to screw you up, son.
Although we should probably mention that he turned out to be not a very nice bloke, didn't he? So, whoops. Bad Sean.
Bad Sean, but
Wonderful Bond, though.
Oh, yeah.
Who who is not a nice bloke, so that works.
Well, yeah, perfect, spot on. Excellent murderer.
Excellent murderer, top murdering.
I mean, it's great in some of the stuff he did with Sidney
so-
Lumet, like The Offence and The Hill. Those are two extraordinary films.
I've seen a couple of other good Sean Connery movies. I watched these really ridiculous YouTube black holes that you can fall down that are all about movie theories and this kind of thing. I ended up watching one today around lunch where they were claiming that The Rock is a sequel to Sean Connery's Bond.
Yes, I've heard that theory.
Which was just I clicked on it intending to debunk it immediately, and then 25 minutes later, I think I might believe them.
My favourite fan theory was that Star Trek and Blake 7 actually take place in the same universe. That the Federation in those series is actually the same organisation. It's that Star Trek is like the propaganda version. This is the sort of stuff that the Federation makes for its television networks to sort of show. Look at the brave guys in the Starfleet doing all this and Blake 7 is actually the reality. It's this grim dystopian nightmare. With costumes done by the people off Howard's Way.
Well, speaking of differences in storytelling, what is your favourite story? That
Oh God. This is. I can never pick one favourite anything. I'm terrible at this. I tried to just pick the first thing that came into my head when I sort of saw that question. I saw that question. I thought, oh God, you bastards! But possibly The Scythe by Ray Bradbury would rocket to the top of that list, and I know he's a dead straight old white man, and we're not supposed to. We're not supposed. Our favourite stories aren't supposed to be by those people anymore.
I don't know, man. I think you can like whatever story you want, as long as it's a good story. What about that story draws you?
I think about everything about it. The storytelling itself is incredibly economical. There were no wasted words at all, and almost every line is like poetry. He has that way of throwing, it's the way that they have this very simple idea of a scythe, which turns out to be the scythe, the one that basically, determines when you die. And it's just the way that the way as it ends into this kind of almost apocalyptic kind of scenario as he just goes berserk and starts reaping his way through the cornfield and all around. And of course, because the story was written in, I think, or at least set in the late 1930s, and so as he's hacking his way across the cornfield, World War II breaks out, and and the nuclear bomb goes off, and it's just everything about it. For me, it's just an absolutely extraordinary work. It goes from that it goes to this very small personal scale with this Okie farmer and his family who were desperately trying to find somewhere to stay during the Great Depression, and they found this little house, and then suddenly this simple little life they've got suddenly takes on these hugely symbolic proportions, because every time you cut down a stalk of wheat, somebody dies. But it's just an amazing story. It's just an amazing story that tells an enormous amount in a very, very short space of time, and it does it in absolutely, beautiful language that doesn't without wasting a single word.
Do you feel like you've consciously taken it on board in terms of your own writing? You've people try and create things that they like, and this idea of like economical, beautiful flourishes of words, but larger meaning behind them. This is, at least from your earlier story, it feels like that's something that you also strive for in your writing.
Well, I mean, one of the things that short stories really teach you with a novel. I mean, like with the story you read before, where we talked about maybe it was kind of laying down a little bit too much information about how this world came about. In a novel, you could get away with a lot more of that exposition. You could have a chapter or a kind of like a page or so of stuff in italics. It was the year, it was the dawn of the year, it was a time of war and heroes, or whatever that kind of almost like a screen crawl at the beginning of a story of a movie. And of course, in a short story, you can't do that. You've got to make every single word count, and so one thing short stories tell you is how to do that. Of course, if you get too absorbed in that, of course, it can actually then be very difficult to write a novel because you're trying to. Okay, yes, well, I've got to. Yes, I know I can tell it all in 3,000 words, but if I want to write a novel and actually make some money, then I've got to do it in at least 80,000 of them. Come on, put me a fucking bone here. Well, Bradbury is sort of is one example there. But when I was at college, my my area was like sort of I did the media performance degree at Salford Uni, so there was like you were looking at production, you were looking at acting, directing, and writing, and certainly a lot of the playwrights I was interested in were the again it tended to be a lot of them were the playwrights of the kind of who were kind of like writing the big, heavy political dramas of the 60s and 70s and 80s, people like Edward Bond and Howard Brenton and David Edgar. There was also writers like David Rudkin, who wrote his first play, A Four-Night Come, which does sound a bit like it might go with Ash Bukake there, but it's a four as in AFORE, not like a come that lasts for 4 nights. But that's like this. I mean, that's an almost Wicker Man-like play in which you have this very bucolic, rustic settings, very real, not cozy in any way. It's like a bunch of very rough guys, in a pear orchard, big pears. But it all builds up to this act of ritual violence, which is absolutely terrifying and very viscerally powerful. And the other playwright was Howard Barker, who was very, very much about a language that could be very, very raw and very, in your face. It was at the same time as it was poetic. It wasn't kind of like, airy, I wandered lonely as a cloud. It was, there could be plenty of obscenities in it because you were trying to often get across something, pretty brutal. So that was kind of an influence too. And one of the, I'd always liked horror particularly, and crime, thrillers and science fiction as well, and I always like the areas where those kind of genres overlap into one another. But when I left college and obviously if you want to write something, if you want to write a screenplay, if you want to see that happen, you need to get a lot of other people together and a lot of money together, whereas a short story you can just sit down and write by yourself. And I kind of found horror seemed to be the field which was doing things like that. So yeah, it kind of brought me full circle in a way to where I'd started out from.
Quite a journey.
We keep gently bumping up against it, so we're just going to flat out ask: what is your process when it comes to writing short fiction? So flash fiction or short stories? How do you approach it?
It can vary. Sometimes, there have been times when I will plan stuff out. Well, I try not with short fiction. I try not to plan it out. I used to be quite micromanaging in terms of planning things out. When I was certainly a few years ago, because all my focus was on novels. And there was one novel I actually the outline of it was about 30,000. The outline for the novel was about 30,000 words long, because there was a hell of a lot going on, huge battle scene, all this stuff, and the only way to be able to write it was to have every detail worked out in advance. It kind of kills it if you try doing that with a short story, I usually find. Nowadays with a short story, I will kind of start by, I will obviously I'll often sometimes let the idea kind of percolate, take shape a bit, and then start writing it and let the kind of structure kind of form as I go. As I start, I tend to get a stronger idea of where I want to go with it and how it's going to function, and then I can just write notes about that. But with a lot of very short stuff, if I'm writing like really short flash fiction, like I often do from a Patreon page, I will often just take a prompt like a story title or something like that and just try to go with that and see or an opening line and see where it can go with that.
So you actually write to prompts quite often then?
Yeah. Sometimes if you're trying to if you're trying to be productive, because there's because I'm trying to write like 1,000 words every day, it's obviously longer to maintain that with long form fiction. So when you're trying to write, if you need to write shorter stuff, that again, well, like I said, again, I think I said before, if you're writing 1,000 words a day, then that's a small and manageable amount of output that that still leaves you with some spoons left over, especially if you work in like a day job like most of us are, to kind of noodle around ideas for other projects. So then you know, if you've got a short story to write, then you've got some notes, you've got some ideas that you can come to the page with, and then you can just try and lay down 1,000 words of that. So the process phase, as I said, I used to be a very big planner of stuff. These days, I'm much more of a pantser. I will, even with novels, I quite like going in with a pretty loose idea of what I want to do, or sometimes a very little idea at all, and let things start to suggest themselves and take shape, and then you can plan a few chapters ahead, and you can start to get an idea of what the general shape of the story is going to be, and so on and so on.
It sounds like you've got a lot of control over your output, whilst also allowing yourself to be flexible enough to create and go where the wind takes you creatively, which is admirable.
It's a very hard. Thank you. It's been a very. It's taken a long while for me to get there. There's the periods when I felt like I was kind of getting somewhere with really getting somewhere when it came to writing novels. I often struggled with short stories because that kind of focus has changed, and I'd often try to just plan out the stories as a tight outline first, and sometimes you actually sometimes you have to kind of let these things develop organically a bit. When trying to just force a structure on them isn't necessarily the best way. So I've got quite a few stories where, kind of I look at them and sometimes think these characters don't, they feel a bit stock rather than like, flesh and blood people kind of thing, which is what you really want to achieve in good fiction, be it.
So you mentioned to us earlier that you kind of have to write. You have to get it out. You have to. If you go a day without writing, then you start to feel negative effects of it. But have you actually ever encountered fairly serious adversity in pursuing your career as a writer?
Depends what you mean by adversity. I mean, there's been plenty of things that have. I mean, there's been a lot of times. I mean, when I can often be my own worst enemy, when I can pretty much convince myself that what I'm writing is, out of step. Nobody wants to read this kind of rubbish anymore, or that if I was ever, if I ever had a day, then that day's gone, and I'm now, out of, sort of like out of date, and without ever having quite been in date.
So when that happens, how do you deal with that? Because I think that's something that a lot of people do get, and it's you've produced so much work that obviously you must have a strong way of fighting through it. So how do you do it?
As I say, it's a compulsion. I mean, I've always written a lot, even when. So my weaknesses were sometimes in actually bothering to send my work out. I could get the wind taken out of my sails by a few rejections, and I think social media can be very much a double-edged sword in this respect as well, because while it's a very good way of reaching out to your friends and gaining support from having a support network there's also that thing, if you start scrolling and it'll be like, I've just sold a story, I've just signed a 3-book deal, and you're jealous in the sense you don't want them not to have those things, but you want to have them as well. And if you start measuring your success, your own yourself against other people's success, that is a very sure way to mess yourself up. So social media breaks can be very handy at times like that to kind of give yourself a sense of balance.
Does that mean you take hiatuses from social media then, Master?
I have
deep
done,
in a trench writing.
I have. There was a period where I basically kept my Facebook deactivated most of the time, except that I would kind of log in the mornings just to check scroll through my Facebook memories for fun. I think one guy actually said, "I'm sorry, mate, I'm going to unfriend you," because he got one of those things on his one of those apps on his computer that told him whenever somebody unfriended him, and it kept saying, "Simon Bestwick has unfriended you. Simon Bestwick has unfriended you. Simon Bestwick has unfriended you," because I kept deactivating and reactivating my profile. It drove him mad. But sometimes it is a good thing to step away from it and to take a break. The last year or so, obviously, because a lot of us have been kind of stuck indoors, and basically a lot of us have kind of been largely living online. It's much more difficult to do. It helps when you actually know people in what is jokingly referred to as real life, obviously. But yeah, things like that. A lot of the time, you're kind of fighting your own. As I say, you can be your own worst. I mean, there can be other things as well, like publishers going under, the occasional dodgy publisher, and I mean, rejections are an absolute are tough. But I mean, I think I started to say this before. I think when we were having some technical problems at the start of the podcast, there was like the other week I had a period where I had like 4 rejections within a 24-hour time frame, which. So there were two stories got rejected, and I sent them one after the other to The Dark, which is a magazine that has a very fast turnaround. It's one of the good things about it. If you're going to get a rejection from them, you've got it usually within hours, and then you can try and find somewhere else. But when they go,
Frankie, that is fast. It's very fast.
Somebody did once joke that he was pretty sure he actually once got a rejection before he'd sent the story, but I don't think it's never that. But they are. I think they've like a lot of the time. One of the things every writer's got to remember: editors have got a pretty clear idea of what they want for their magazine, for their anthology. So it's often not a case of your work necessarily not being good enough or being bad. It may not fit in with the overall tone, or they may have accepted already accepted a story that had a similar theme, or in a similar vein. There are all sorts of reasons for rejection, and the important thing is to keep getting up and sending it out there. But yeah, having 4 rejections in a row did feel a little bit like like taking four rights to the jaw in rapid succession. And I posted something about this on Facebook, and one guy, bless him, he said, "God, what chance the rest of us got when you're getting rejected?" And I was like, "Huh? What?" That kind of really weird moment when you kind of realise, oh shit, yes, I have been doing this for a while, but the fact that anyone actually thinks that I'm sort of really I'm like a success. I don't make a living at this. I work. Yeah. I have a day job in a call center. I'm not like anybody's idea of a role model for a successful career. But it was in a way it was kind of quite a nice little boost to the ego to realize that some people actually think I'm somebody when I'm very much not. But
I'm taking you as a role model immediately. You've come immediately on a podcast and talked about ash and jizz streams. And if I can get away with that, I'm going to make a life of this.
Oh well, fair enough.
In your honour.
Thank you. As I say, what got me a couple of posts later, Ramsey Campbell popped up on my feed and said, "We all still get them, Simon." I'm like, okay, I feel a lot less bad about those rejections now, because there's like the guy who's won more awards for horror fiction than any living author. I think any dead author either is basically saying, "Yep, I still get them all the time." It's like, okay, I kind of feel better about that now.
Oh, lovely.
And I did get an acceptance the next day for an anthology I'd really wanted to get in. So, swings and roundabouts.
Well, it's not all, but swings and roundabouts. Yeah, like keeping your chin up seems to be a big thing. Getting out of your own way a bit.
Yeah, or maybe not so much keeping your chin up as your head down. Yeah, what counts is the work you do and being happy and being satisfied with the work, fulfilled by the work that you're producing. And then you worry about finding a home for it. A friend of mine, Gemma Files, an amazing writer from Canada, she said something like, both of her parents having been freelancers, her basic mentality was, even if I only get paid $5 for something, if I'm getting paid for something, I'm doing okay. So I mean, that may not be the route to riches, but I've actually sold a few stories and I've surprised myself. I've just worked in short stories between longer projects this year, and I've done some stuff I've been pretty pleased with, and that's actually sold. Sometimes to some decent profile markets. So I can't really complain.
Congratulations for that.
Thank you. Yes,
not at all. Yeah.
I'm not going to complain about it.
Stop reminding us that you shouldn't be here.
Please sell that to my bank.
So, I think I could probably answer this one on your behalf. Actually, I'll try. So, if you could only pick one genre of fiction to keep, and all the others were fired into the heart of the sun, they're gone forever. Which would you choose, and why is it horror?
Well, in terms of keeping it, in terms of what I would be, writing and reading myself, I think partly because it just seems to be my natural home. It does seem to be the genre where I can write about all the stuff that I like writing about, or that most concerns me. Because you can use horror to write about anything. You can write about the past, about the future, about the present. You can write about what you're afraid of. You can write about what you're pissed off at, and you can kind of spread very easily from that into any other genre. So to me, if you've got horror, then you can retain elements of every other. You can retain a bit of every other genre anyway. You can't fire all the others into the sun, because horror's kind of clings to them. We can voyage into the arena of crime or thriller. You can slither into science fiction or into fantasy. You can even slither into romance and porn. If you really must, Twilight. No, but I mean,
if that tickles your fancy, yeah.
Well, I mean, there are. I mean, interesting. There's a lot of women, especially women, who write horror that is very wrapped up in eroticism and sexuality, and not just in a sort of Twilight, hot girls and hot vampires kind of way. Gemma Files, who I mentioned before, has written a lot like that. Livia Llewellyn, whose collections Engines of Desire, they have done some remarkable stuff in that vein. Definitely worth checking out. As I say, you can use horror as pretty much a jumping off point for any kind of field of fiction, of literature that you like. That's one of the things that I love about it.
We've asked this question is we get a cheating answer. I love it.
It's cheating the wizard on a technicality.
They're cheating the devil out of his deal or something, isn't it? Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot.
Take your monkey paw and shove it up your ass.
So this one's a bit sort of out there, I think, but we like it because it can possibly tell us a bit more about how you live your life, not just write your stories. What's a quote that really strikes a chord with you? A quote that you possibly live by?
Well, one I always used to love was there's a song by New Model Army called "Before I Get Old," and I always said that was what I wanted to live by. But that had lines like, I'm going to see the sun set over every sea, every city wall, every mountain peak before I get old. But I'm 47 and I haven't done that, so I don't think I can. I don't think I can claim that. But a quote I absolutely love, because it's about writing, and it's from a lady called Natalie Goldberg. She wrote, if you're ever trying to just actually kickstart your own writing, then her book Writing Down the Bones is fantastic, along with Julia Cameron's The Right to Write, which is a little bit new agey but still very helpful. But Goldberg's quote is, where is it? It's a bit of a long one, but it goes like this. Okay, your kids are climbing into the cereal box. You have $1.25 left in your checking account. Your husband can't find his shoes. Your car won't start. You know you have lived a life of unfulfilled dreams. Amen, sister. There is the threat of a nuclear holocaust. There is apartheid in South Africa. This was written in the 80s. It is 20 degrees below zero outside. Your nose itches. You don't even have 3 plates that match to serve dinner on. Your feet are swollen. You need to make a dentist appointment. The dog needs to be let out. You have to defrost the chicken and to make a phone call to your cousin in Boston. You're worried about your mother's glaucoma. You forgot to put film in the camera. Safeway has a sale on solid white tuna. You're waiting for a job offer. You just bought a computer and you have to unpack it. You have to start eating sprouts and stop eating donuts. You lost your favourite pen, and the cat peed on your current notebook. Take out another notebook, pick up another pen, and just write, just write, just write. In the middle of the world, make one positive step. In the centre of chaos, make one definitive act. Just write. Say yes, stay alive, be awake. Just write, just write, just write. I think that's possibly a quote. I live. Yeah, it is the one thing.
No, it's powerful.
Yeah.
You
can. It's something you can control. It's something it's a one positive thing that you can do. And I know can sound a little bit, hey man, but it's true. And that's.
I think it sounded very practical. Like this idea of in the middle of all that chaos, just take one definitive step.
Yeah.
That frees up a lot of as soon as you can put one foot in front of the other or whatever, then you can begin to break down larger problems into smaller problems and fix them.
Very much so.
I like that. I think that, I like that a lot.
It's one of the reasons.
As someone with an anxious mind, it spoke to me.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons that a lot of people have found Goldberg's book very helpful for them as writers, or in any other kind of creative field, because it is very much about cutting through the shit and just actually getting on with actually trying to write something or create something that is your own and that is truthful, and in a very kind of no nonsense. There's another wonderful quote from her, which from the same book in a different context, and it's what she said was she went through this period where every time she sat down to write, she felt this deep sense of peace and calm, and she thought, because she's a Zen Buddhist, she thought, lo and behold, I'm becoming enlightened at last, and this is far more important than writing, and besides, this is what all writing is eventually supposed to be about. And she said after a few months of this, she went to her Zen master Katagiri Roshi and asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, that's just laziness. Get back to work."
Oh, fantastic! So,
well,
I think I was making the same segue as you. There you go.
I think we were going to say almost the same thing. We're starting to see the philosophy behind your incredible work ethic, and there is a lot to go into there. So if some of our listeners want to start, they want to get their first little taste of Simon Bestwick. Easy, all of you. Phrasing, I know. Where should they start? What's the best? I know. What's the best story or novel or any? Where do they start?
It depends what they're after. Now, if you're after short stories, there's a few collections of mine out there. There's a couple of mini collections from Black Shuck, Singing Back the Dark and 9 Ghosts. If you want to take a punt on a longer collection, there's And Cannot Come Again. Yeah, just get your jokes in about the title now, which is from Horrific Tales. And that's a collection of 17 stories and novelettes. There's, including a novella called Angels of the Silences, which is also available separately, but you can get it as part of the collection there. There's a couple of new novellas. Rothsteyer, which is, if you want to read a novel about an immortal lesbian assassin from the Habsburg Empire who's now working as a mortuary attendant in modern-day Manchester, there you go.
Damn, that sounds great.
I thought you might like that one. A Different Kind of Light,
Yeah.
which is, this is the one about, this was inspired by, there was a terrible, back in 1955, there was the worst accident in motorsports history at Le Mans. The 24-hour Le Mans. Basically, one of the cars crashed into the spectators and exploded, killed about 80 people. And one of the things that stuck in my head, because there's footage and pictures of the aftermath, which is pretty grim, but I always remember reading a quote from one cameraman who basically said, I have covered wars, murders, just about everything you can imagine, but there is stuff here that would make people, in the can, in the film, that would make people sick if they saw it. They were like kiddies with their heads sliced off, and they're still just sitting there holding the ice cream cones they were eating a second before. That kind of sticks. And just the thought, there's this footage out there of these, these horrific images in them, and of course the thought that some sick bastard would probably pay a great deal of money to watch it. That was kind of like the starting point of the novella, where basically a guy gets called in to sort of authenticate what's supposed to be this previously unseen footage, and it is the previously unseen footage, but it's not just the disaster that's been caught on film. There's something else caught on the film, and it starts to get out and interfere with anyone who's seen it. I like to think it's one of the scariest things I've written. So that's A Different Kind of Light.
I'm super into this.
Of other stuff, if you're after kind of something post-apocalyptic with lots of action and shooty bang sticks and explosions and some bit of Lovecraftian horror thrown into the mix, there's the Black Road novels, of which I've done 3 so far, currently out from Snow Books. There's Hell's Ditch, Devil's Highway, and Wolf's Hill, and I will be writing a fourth and final novel called Road's End at some point in the future. There's, for more straight up horror stuff, there is The Faceless and The Feast of All Souls from Solaris Books. And if you like zombies and don't mind me not getting any money from the sale, then you can buy my first novel, Tide of Souls. That came out from Abaddon Books, who writes. They publish stuff on a work for hire basis, so they buy all rights when you when you sign the contract. I don't get any royalties from that one, but I'm still very proud of it. It got a 4-star review in the Daily Telegraph, which was a bit strange. Somebody actually rang me one Saturday morning and said, "You do realise you're in the Daily Telegraph?" I'm like, "You fucking what?" So I had to go to the local newsagents, buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph, buy a copy of Anal Buster magazine to hide the Daily Telegraph in, so that nobody thought I habitually read the Daily Telegraph. And then the best bit was I tend to be quite left wing, and my father is the other way. So when I told him, and he managed to get his wires crossed, and he went out and bought the Guardian. And I think his hands were coming out in hives, touching it. So it was quite entertaining, that one. So those are.
What was that? What was that story I read out earlier about the middle ground in politics? What was that? What was that about?
I believe that's the paper I that they put on all the underground stations, isn't it? Because it's just full of shit.
Well, those all sound fantastic, and we really hope that people listening to this go out and pick it up. But they would also like to, I'm sure, follow you online, to know when you've got more stuff coming out. And I know that you're quite active on Twitter when you're not hiatusing. Yes. So where can people find you online?
Okay, well, on Twitter, I post as Jevadan Shoal, which is GEVAUDANSHOAL. He's one of the characters in the Black Road series. I have a Patreon page where I post free fiction. I may well post today's story up there for anyone who wants to. Anyone who hasn't heard the podcast. So that gets regular. I try to update that with about 4 new pieces of work every month. And I've got a blog, although that's well overdue for an update, which is simon-bestwick.blogspot.com. Nothing fancy. I keep meaning to get a proper website. A friend of mine did actually buy simonbestwick.com for me as a present, but lovely. Then the payment slipped, and now it's some twats putting some twat of an estate agent owns it or something, I think now. Or at least when I typed simonbestwick.com in, it came up
not
with
houses, you fools.
I know. Stuff that will help, keep me off the streets and out of trouble, and stop my wife from beating me to death after
I thought
spending.
You were going to say that it was an errant chandler or something. Like it's somebody selling weird candles, but
yeah, that would be it. I could make. I could do a sideline in that, couldn't I? That could be how I.
Yeah.
Support
ash candles.
Ash candles
are oddly shaped.
What you do is you have one big grey candle with loads of thin white candles inside, so the white streams. Right. Anyway,
They're just wicks, aren't they, Nico?
I am not for nothing. Am I known as the Filth Wizard? But there we go.
Filth Wizard. Well,
Filth Wizard. Episode 9.
That's what one of my
Filth
friends
Wizard.
called me. Another one called me Pimp Daddy, but that's a different story.
Pimp Daddy, Filth Wizard, Simon Bestwick. It's been fantastic to have you on, mate, and all the
Wonderful.
best.
Thank you, guys. It's been brilliant talking to you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast,
Well, magic can only take one so far. The tiny bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?